本期视频是格雷厄姆艾利森近日参加油管一期访谈节目的节选。格雷厄姆是美国著名政治学者、外交政策分析家和国际关系理论家。他提出的修昔底德陷阱一词广为世界所知。访谈中，他称赞了中国历史文化和中国哲学所蕴含的智慧。我们看看他是怎么说的吧。
What would it take for China and the U.S. to end up peacefully, like 4 out of the 16 scenarios? And of course, the second picture would be one where China and the U.S. might end up like 12 out of the 16 scenarios. Please.
Well, thank you very much for having me, and a big question. So let me make 4 or 5 points and then try not to be too long about them. So the first point, and I think you rightly remind us that something pretty significant happened in San Francisco last November. Usually when you have summits of 2 presidents or such meetings, if you're involved in them, it's a big deal. And you and I both worked very hard to prepare them. And afterwards, we try to get a press release that says the world changed and so forth. I think this was a really important meeting because they not only put a floor under what was a rapidly deteriorating relationship to the point that it had become quite dangerous. I think they actually laid a pretty solid foundation on which they and their governments can now constructively build a more productive relationship. So that's the big bottom line.
Right.
And the key elements of this, which both Biden and Xi each characterizes in his own way, but essentially the same thing, is that there's 3 elements in the relationship. There's competition, there's communication, and there's cooperation.
Right.
Now, previously, there's been emphasized one, but then you can't have the other, or there's been a confusion about this. But I was very impressed when I was in Beijing just a couple of weeks ago, and that he characterizes it as a Thucydidean rivalry in the first instance, but one in which, therefore, communication, and especially between the 2 leaders, private, candid conversation about the most delicate issues is essential to prevent misunderstandings. And thirdly, that this doesn't preclude cooperation, and especially cooperation on issues in which each nation's survival requires a degree of cooperation by both itself and by its partner. So he has this interesting statement that he had made when the congressional delegation had gone over to Beijing to see him, Chuck Schumer, the leader of the Senate, and a half dozen senators. And in the middle of talking about Thucydides' trap and what to do about it, he said at one point, look, I am in you, and you are in me.
Yeah.
Well, for Americans, we don't know what two of the senators called me up when they got back and said, what the hell is he talking about? What is this? I said, I don't know. I'll go look to try to see. Well, lo and behold, in Chinese tradition, in the Qing dynasty, there was such an idea. I am in you and you are in me. And actually that draws on a lot of Chinese, both history and Chinese philosophy. So there's a famous story of Wu and Yue that Sun Tzu tells about in 2 tribes, the Wu and the Yue, and these 2 guys that represent them are on a ship, and the ship sinks, and they're in a rowboat, just the 2 of them, but the rowboat is too wide for either of them to hold both oars. So either they row and they just go around in a circle and never get to the shore and they die, or they find a way to cooperate. So interesting. So fierce rivals, but can also be cooperating. So I think, to jump to the conclusion here, that when they talk to each other candidly and privately, nobody knows exactly what they said, but I'm pretty sure they said to each other, I understand we do not want to have a war with China. You understand you don't want to have a war with the U.S. If we really had a war, full-scale war, Both states have robust nuclear arsenals today that would be as sure as ever in the Cold War to destroy their adversary even after they had been attacked. Biden understands this in his bones.
Right.
That's part of why he's been so cautious and careful and thoughtful in the response to Russia's invasion of Ukraine. He says, we're not fighting World War III for Ukraine. Why not? Because World War III, as Reagan taught us, at the end of that war, a nuclear war cannot be won because your whole country's been destroyed. So must therefore never be fought. So that means I have to constrain myself in ways and have to persuade you that we constrain ourselves mutually and then we cooperate to make sure either some incident or accident or third-party provocation doesn't pull us into a spiral that leads us into a catastrophic outcome.